you know that I love to hike, and that I spent last week in New Hampshire climbing 4,000 plus foot mountains. To me, the mountaintops are the place to be, and the Bible agrees, I think. You see, it is the mountaintops that God reveals God's self to creation through the biblical narrative. For Isaac, for Elijah, for Moses, to the Transfiguration, all of these moments happened on mountaintops. And I understand why. Mountaintops are truly holy ground. They are places where one sees unusual things. A few years ago, I was hiking across the Franconia Ridge, having just summited Mount Lafayette, which is, I think, about 4,500 feet. It was a windy day, as any day above the tree line is. I had my windbreaker on. I had pulled the hood around my face so I could see out around the windbreaker. And I was walking along the ridge toward the south summit. And something caught my eye, and I stopped. I think much like Moses in his herding of the sheep. Moses saw a burning bush, and it caught his eye. I saw something purple. And you may think this is not amazing or unusual, but when you're 5,200 feet or so up in the Arctic zone, as it is called, it is amazing and it is unusual. Not much lives up there except lichen and moss and dirt and rocks, a few birds. And I remember looking closely at this rock face, and there was a crack in the rock. My dad took a picture of me staring at this rock, and when I was looking at it, you can't see what I'm looking at. But there in front of me, growing out of the crack, was a purple flower, a small purple flower blossoming up in the Arctic zone. And curiosity overcame me in that moment, and I took a step closer to that flower. And with that step, I felt somehow transported onto holy ground. The same as Moses. I believe it was curiosity that invited him and encouraged him to investigate what he was seeing, a burning bush. It was curiosity that brought him onto holy ground and placed him in the very presence of God. And when that happens, everything melts away. That purple flower was all that existed in my mind. My heart became filled with a sense of awe and wonder and beauty and worship of a God who could do something so amazing in such cold temperatures. And I can imagine that this is what was happening in Moses' heart at that moment, and why he climbed that, and that is why I climb to the peaks, hoping that year after year I can once again have a moment where God will reveal God's self to me in these small but amazing ways. In her book, Sacred Dimensions of Women's Experience, Elizabeth Dodson Gray writes, "What hallows a space sacred is what happens there." Much of our awareness of sacred space and places happens when we experience times that are holy. From the contour of our inner selves to the places in which we live, play, and work, to our home planet and beyond, we dwell in and move through sacred spaces that take on meaning according to how we engage them. Sacred space is born of relationship, of care, of what we give and what we receive in them. And sacred space and holy ground is made by the invitation of God to enter into a conversation and into communing with God. An invitation to hear God's call, and an invitation to act on what God is asking us to do. Unfortunately, for us, God does not always ask simple tasks. That day, God asked Moses to do something completely overwhelming, to confront Pharaoh, a god to the Egyptian people. Pharaoh was a god. Moses was to confront him and to free a people and to birth a nation. Just an everyday, simple task that any little person can I sometimes, as I ponder church growth, listen to people talk about all the things you have to do for church growth, revitalization, and redevelopment. I sometimes feel like that. Like this is a call from God to grieve the loss of the old, to free a people to dream once again, and to create a new creation out of that dream. Just an everyday, simple task that any old person can do. I'm not so sure. I feel that weight of responsibility, that weight of being overwhelmed by such a call and a task. And I bet you all feel that weight this week, having spent your week working so hard, feeling exhausted and overwhelmed at so many people trying to do so many different things. I think Moses definitely felt overwhelmed, afraid, and insecure at the task that God was calling him to complete. For Moses' protest of inadequacy, his request for a sign of reassurance, it did not come as a physical, miraculous one like the burning bush that brought him into community with God in conversation. It came rather as an intangible promise that Moses would bring the people, the Israelites, out of Egypt to this mountain to worship and to be with God. The sign, in fact, expresses the whole purpose of the escape from Israel. The purpose being to return to a mountain and to serve and to worship Yahweh, to be free from all that weighs us down, that oppresses us, that exhausts us, so that we can truly, fully be in the presence of God, in holy space, rejoicing with no worries or concerns. Moses, however, is not as reassured from that as he would like, and so he requests and demands that God identify himself. He does not believe that the Israelite people are going to listen to him without God's true name. In the ancient world, knowing the true name of a person or a God meant that one could understand the other's true essence. It meant that it was possible for the purpose to use God's name in a purpose of coercion or manipulation. I like to read fantasy books. I love magic books. I love Harry Potter. My partner Stephanie gave me for Christmas a book called So You Want to Be a Wizard, which is about a little girl and a little boy who unknowingly picked up books that tell them how to become wizards. And one of the things that they learn is that your name, knowing someone's name, gives you power over that thing. It allows you to change the essence and the core and the center of what that is. It allows you to have power over it, to manipulate it. And so they are told to keep their names secret and sacred to themselves. And in order to do any magic, they have to commune with the nature and the world around them and learn the true essence of that which they are trying to work with, whether it's trees or rocks or metal or whatever it is. They have to learn the name before they can do a spell. And I think that is very much in line with what was happening when Moses was asking for God's name. He knew that if he knew God's name, he then had power equal to, if not greater than God, to be able to speak about a being and to get the Israelite people to listen and to understand him. God, however, is much smarter than any of us. And God refuses to be controlled. Yet, in this story, God is completely self-revelatory in his answer. I am who I am. It is not a philosophical answer. Yahweh is herself, and this must be accepted in all of our dealings with God. Nobody will ever wield the power given by a name over God, or for God, or despite God. Moses can expect no further reassurance than that. Moses has to trust Yahweh, And that is all there is to it. Yahweh can only be known as God reveals God's self. Now, I think it's important to take a moment to understand that God's answer, I am who I am, echoes so many different places in our Bible. It echoes the statements of Jesus in John. I am the vine, I am the truth, I am the light. It echoes the concept in the Gospels of God with us, and the concept in Revelation of God with us. Hebrew does not use tenses. There's no present or future. They're not indicated. They're all indicated by the same form, and it is the job of the reader to decide whether it's past, present, or future. Thus, when God says, I am who I am, God is saying, I am with you. It is I who is with you. That is my name. The verb indicates presence, being there, in the moment, right then and there. It indicates that God is a God of personal relationships. And this is the reassurance that God is giving to Moses and to the people and to the Israelites in Egypt under the oppression. God has heard the cry, and God is with you in all of God's being. It is a reassurance for us as we begin this overwhelming task of church growth, church renewal, revitalization, and redevelopment. We must remember that God is with us on this journey. God does not call us to a task and then leave us alone to do it. This task can come to fruition because God is with us. This church will grow because the Spirit of God is in here, because we recognize this as sacred space. It will grow because those outside will see something curious, like a purple flower or a burning bush, and they will be invited, enticed. Their curiosity will bring them in here to commune with God, to commune with our community, and to find themselves in holy, sacred space. And it will be their experience here, an experience of being with God in God's presence on sacred space, that will keep them here. So as we go forward in our planning and our hoping, let us remember that God is with us. God is calling us on this journey and will walk this journey side by side with us. Will continue to give us signs as he did for the Israelites and for Moses. And God will lead us into the land of milk and honey. If we can imagine what those curious things are, what those burning bushes are, that will ask those in this community outside our walls, that will catch their eye and bring them forward into our community and help us grow and experience God in new and amazing ways. Blessed be.